I am an African.
No, I mean, you raised a very interesting point about being able to have constructive criticism of other African countries. And we've just seen an example of the backlash that one might receive in providing this type of criticism. And sort of the response was quite polarizing. But you also observed another election in Liberia that saw the incumbent president lose, and now he's a one-term president, at least for now. And we saw him accept defeat, George Weah accept defeat to Joseph Boakai, the former vice president of Liberia. And it was widely held as a peaceful transfer of power. But in the wider context of things, that's a bit of an exception right now in Africa, considering since 2021, we have had around 8 successful or attempted coups, in Niger, Mali, the whole Sahel belt. Even if we exclude Sudan, there's quite a lot of coups. And, you could almost draw yourself back into the 1970s and describe Africa and then describe Africa now. It would sound the same: coups, military dictators, and so on and so forth. So, is democracy on the whole failing in Africa? Would you say it's failing because of what's going on, or do you think maybe we've got it wrong? And why exactly do you think young Africans are so enthusiastic about other alternatives like military, military rule? You saw people running around the streets waving flags of France, waving flags of Russia, in these countries like Niger and Mali.
Well, first of all, you've asked 2 questions. Let me try to address myself. First of all, I want to agree with you that the Liberian election, yes, I led an observer mission there under the auspices of ASA, a very credible global organization doing an excellent job in monitoring elections, but also doing deep research on the processes of democracy on the continent of Africa. So I was very honored to lead that very prestigious organization to that effect. So it was very relieving for me after the experience in Zimbabwe, where my life was threatened, that I was going to be killed, and it was ugly.
Wow.
To go to another country where there was basically, in our search, as we observed, there was absolutely you could not see any intention for anybody to rig the election. And I think maybe it's because Liberia has a very rough background of civil war. And I think the Liberians do not want to, play around with peace that they enjoy. And they ensured, and we need to salute the President George Weah for the manner in which he conducted himself. He really put absolutely no finger in there trying to manipulate the election. It is for that reason that an opposition person actually won the election, because George Weah did not try to manipulate it, at least from our own observations. And the Electoral Commission of Liberia was extremely exemplary. It was very healing to work with a country like that, which was determined to ensure that the will of the Liberian people was expressed at the ballot box. And we saw that happen. And the results were read out. And the final result, although there was a rerun, was that Vice President Boakai only won with 28,000 votes. And yet, President George Weah actually conceded defeat before the final votes were counted. And I think that is historic. And these are the success stories on the African continent, which is always described as a place of shambolic elections and criminality, corruption. Africans are no good. They are always looking for ways to destroy themselves. It's not the Africa we are about to experience now. I think that Liberia has made us proud. President George Weah has also made us proud, and we salute him. And the incoming president, his tone continues to encourage us, and we pray that that country shall make great progress. But you also, Zenge, raised another issue about the contrast in West Africa, where there are all these coups that are taking place. How does that relate to what happened in Liberia? and how does that speak to the state of democracy on the continent? I think my own experience in observing elections and running for political office myself as president in my country, there are many things that are at play. Democracy on the continent has been under threat for a long time. And Zambia, of course, stands out as a country that gives an example of countries that can move from one administration to the other peacefully. And so Zambia is a great success story on the continent, and we pray that it continues to be so. The reason why we feel there are coups happening in certain parts of the continent is that the young people are starting to lose confidence in the electoral processes. And that is why the report that was given in Zimbabwe by SADC and African Union, by the one European Union report, were basically the same. We called out those areas that compromise the democratic process. And now in West Africa, we are noticing that they are realizing that democracy is not giving them what they are putting into that election. In other words, when they vote, their vote is stolen, and the express will of the people in those countries is compromised and taken away, and therefore leaving very little option for these younger people to say, look, the only way to go is probably through coups. That is why some of us are such big voices on free and fair elections across the continent in order to forestall this lack of confidence that is now rising in electoral elections. And so I think that we need to work together to try to place back confidence and value in elections so that the younger generation do not have to use terrible means in order to acquire political power, including military coups. I think that if you use military coups and you start to go in that direction, Africa is being taken back, dozens of years back, and we don't need that. Time to move forward is now, and we ask all the presidents or the leaders of the African countries to respect the will of their people in order to maintain peace and stability on the continent.
Yeah. Just to Zeng, if you don't mind, can I just add to that? A follow-up question would be, because I think you've highlighted the importance of having free and fair elections and how the effect it can have on a democracy, basically. But I think there's some other people or economists that have suggested that perhaps democracy isn't the best model for, and this is not something Africa for Dummies is saying or anyone is saying. I'm just saying I've heard this argument before, essentially that democracy isn't the best model for many African countries because it doesn't give enough time for sound decisions to be made, in the sense that decisions are made to essentially get reelected than to actually further develop the country. So number one, do you agree with that argument? And number two, do you think that democracy should still the way it's functioning, which is 4 years, another election, or should we come up with some sort of hybrid system or some other system that might take into consideration the current things that we are going through? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you see, let me be quick here. The Americans are very clear. Of course, they exercise democracy in elections and in other areas. You see that they do their very best to exercise the democratic tenets. But they don't call democracy as a final system of governance. They actually call democracy an experiment. Though, I'm a student of political science and I was trained in an American university. They call it an American experiment. So democracy is not necessarily the alpha and the omega of governance systems that is going to meet the aspirations of the people. I have a lot of questions on the effectiveness of the current system of democracy that we are using to govern ourselves. The only thing we have now is that this is the system that we have all agreed on by consensus, by which we govern ourselves. Is it perfect? No. Even the Americans decided they were not going to use it the way we use it in Africa, one man, one vote. they decided to go into electoral colleges, a college issue, so that, you know, it's not the one with the maximum popular vote that becomes president, but some system that really talks to the way their community and society is managed. And Africa must now come to a place where they say, thank you for this democracy we have used. If America can tweak it, we also can tweak it so that it meets our cultural and our aspirations as a people. And you've said it right. You know, sometimes, you know, this whole thing is about winning the next election. So the quality of policies and decisions made by politicians is highly compromised, because it's not to meet the needs of the people, but it's basically to win an election. So we need to integrate, you know, to interrogate this. And I say to the Africans, let's not be afraid to put this question on the table. Is this the best way to govern ourselves moving forward? Is 5 years, 4 years enough for a president to roll out what they believe they can roll out for their people? These are questions that need to be constantly asked in order for us to keep improving ourselves.
I am an African.